Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next move. Stop! They thought Eleanor Vance was home crying. She was actually buying a $10,000 dress and hiring the best private detective in the city. Tell us in the comments, do you believe a person can be completely betrayed and still achieve victory? What would you do in a situation like this, Part 1? The coronation of audacity. The young woman in Scarlett Valentino, clinging to Alexander Sterling's arm at the Grand Astor Club in New York, knew 3 crucial things. First, that Eleanor Vance had orchestrated every detail for her to be there that night. Second, that the flash drive in Eleanor's Hermes bag contained photos of Scarlett with 2 other married men over the last 6 months. And third, most importantly, that in 30 minutes, Scarlett Blake would leave that gala ball weeping like a child, while Eleanor would become the legend that New York high society would recount for the next 50 years. Alexander thought he was trading a boring wife for a luxury arm candy. Scarlett thought she was conquering a prince. Neither of them imagined they had just awakened a queen, and queens do not forgive. They destroy with style. The September night at the Grand Astor Club was drenched in ostentation and falsehood. Baccarat crystal chandeliers cast a golden light over the main ballroom, where the crème de la crème of New York society gathered for the Legacy Foundation's traditional annual gala ball. Alexander Sterling adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. At 38, the real estate mogul had built an empire that guaranteed him a constant presence in the social columns. But tonight, specifically, he felt particularly anxious. Not because of the event's importance, but because of the company he had chosen to bring. Scarlett Blake glided through the ballroom as if she owned the place. At 29, the young woman flaunted a striking, artificially enhanced beauty, with platinum blonde hair falling in perfect waves over bare shoulders, highlighted by the Scarlett Valentino gown Alexander had specially purchased for the occasion. The generous cleavage and the fabric that hugged every curve of her body did not go unnoticed by the male gazes present, nor by the whispered comments of the society matrons. "Alexander, darling," the sharp voice of Mrs. Victoria Albright, a senator's wife, cut the air like a knife. "What a surprise to see you here, and with company." Her eyes scanned Scarlett from head to toe, a predatory analysis disguised as social courtesy. "Victoria, always a pleasure." Alexander forced a smile, while feeling sweat form in small beads on his forehead. "This is Scarlett Blake, my special consultant." Scarlett laughed, a crystalline sound that resonated in the room. "Consultant? What modesty, my love." Her blood-red nails possessively caressed Alexander's arm. "We're much more intimate than that, aren't we?" Alexander's embarrassment was palpable, but Scarlett seemed to feed on the situation. She had spent months planning this moment, the night she would finally be introduced in society as Alexander Sterling's new woman. In her young, ambitious mind, this was her official coronation. The legitimate wife, Eleanor, had become a ghostly figure in their conversations, a woman who preferred discretion to the spotlight. And this, for Scarlett, was a sign of weakness. "And where is Mrs. Sterling?" Victoria's question was posed with the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to poke to inflict pain. "I haven't seen her at a social event in ages." Alexander swallowed. "Eleanor has been busy with personal projects." "What a shame," Victoria murmured, though her tone suggested the opposite. She was such an elegant woman. She always knew how to behave with class. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Scarlett felt a pang of irritation. Why did everyone keep comparing her to that faded woman? "Alexander, I need to talk to you about the marina project," interrupted David Shaw, one of the firm's junior partners. The relief on Alexander's face was instantaneous. While the men stepped away to discuss business, Scarlett remained alone in the center of the ballroom, feeling like a queen on her throne. Social photographers' flashes found her constantly, and she knew her photos would be featured in the gossip magazines the following week. Alexander Sterling's new passion. Oh, she could already imagine the headlines. Bubbly champagne flowed generously among the guests, and Scarlett didn't hold back. With every sip, she felt more secure, more in control. She approached a group of socialites she knew superficially from salons and gyms in the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. "Scarlett, what a stunning dress," commented Patricia, the wife of a judge. "Valentino, a gift from Alexander," Scarlett replied, making sure to emphasize the intimacy. "He has such refined taste for choosing women's clothing." The women exchanged knowing glances. They all knew what that meant. Alexander Sterling was publicly flaunting his mistress, a behavior that, while not uncommon in these circles, still caused a stir when done so blatantly. "And how are you adapting to your new position?" Patricia's question was loaded, and they all laughed discreetly. "Perfectly," Scarlett retorted, lifting her chin. "In fact, I've always felt more at home in this environment than certain people who isolate themselves at home." The malicious comment about Eleanor did not go unnoticed. The women present knew the unwritten code of high society well. When a wife stopped appearing at events, it usually meant she had lost the battle to a younger, more ambitious rival. On the other side of the room, Alexander tried to focus on the business conversation, but his eyes constantly drifted towards Scarlett. Part of him felt proud to be with a woman so young and attractive. It was a confirmation of his virility and success. Another part, however, began to question the wisdom of so openly exposing his extramarital relationship. "She's gorgeous," commented David, following Alexander's gaze. "But don't you think it's risky to bring your friend to an event of this magnitude?" "Scarlett isn't just a friend," Alexander retorted, more defensively than he intended. "We have a serious relationship." "Serious?" David raised an eyebrow. "And does your wife know?" Alexander looked away. Eleanor knew, of course. How could she not know? The rumors had been rampant for months, and he hadn't even bothered to be discreet. But Eleanor, true to her reserved nature, hadn't made scenes or threats. She had simply withdrawn further, which Alexander had interpreted as tacit acceptance of the new situation. "Eleanor understands that our marriage has evolved into something different," he murmured, sipping Scotch whiskey. The truth was, Alexander had married Eleanor Vance 15 years ago for practical reasons. She came from a traditional family with important connections in the judiciary and politics, connections that were crucial to his business growth. Eleanor was intelligent, cultured, a perfect wife on paper. But as the years passed, Alexander began to see her as part of the furniture, always present, always reliable. But without the sparkle and excitement he had started seeking elsewhere. Scarlett represented everything his wife was not: spontaneous, sensual, impressionable. "Alexander!" Scarlett's voice snapped him back to the present. She approached with a radiant smile, followed by a younger man he recognized as Ethan Campbell, the heir to one of the country's largest fortunes. "Ethan was just telling me about the new art collection he recently acquired," Scarlett said, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Picasso, Van Gogh! It's fascinating!" Alexander felt a pang of irritation. Scarlett was clearly flirting. And Ethan, known for his womanizing reputation, seemed willing to reciprocate. It was humiliating to have to compete for his own mistress's attention in public. "Scarlett, we need to speak with the event organizers," he interrupted, taking her arm. "But Alexander, Ethan was inviting me to see his private gallery," she pouted. "Another time," Alexander retorted dryly, guiding her away from the young heir. As they walked across the ballroom, Scarlett whispered in his ear, "You don't have to be jealous, my love. You know you're the only man in my life." The words were supposed to reassure him, But Alexander felt a growing unease. There was something about Scarlett's attitude tonight, an excessive confidence, an assumption that her place was guaranteed, that deeply bothered him. Near the main table, where event organizers and important politicians were seated, Alexander saw Dr. Julian Hale, an influential society columnist. The man was observing them with evident interest, already mentally drafting the note that would appear in his column the next day. Alexander Sterling, it's been a while. Julian approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And this lovely young woman must be Mrs. Sterling? The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt his face flush as Scarlett, far from being embarrassed, smiled even wider. Not yet, she retorted with a giggle. But who knows, maybe soon. The insinuation was crystal clear. Scarlett was not content with just being the mistress. She had bigger plans, and she was announcing them to one of the city's most dangerous gossips. Alexander forced a nervous laugh. Julian, meet Scarlett Blake. Scarlett is one of the city's most respected journalists. It's a great pleasure, Julian said, kissing Scarlett's hand with exaggerated gallantry. I imagine we'll have much to talk about in the near future. The veiled threat did not go unnoticed by Alexander. Julian Hale had the power to make or break reputations with a single column. If he decided to turn the situation into a scandal, the consequences could be devastating, not only for his public image, but for his business. While they spoke, the ballroom continued to fill. Influential politicians greeted businessmen. Socialites flaunted their latest acquisitions of jewelry and couture, and the orchestra played classic waltzes, creating a perfect soundtrack for this theater of appearances. Scarlett was in her element. She greeted acquaintances, posed for photos, waved to important people as if she were, in fact, Mrs. Sterling. Every gesture was calculated to solidify her position, to make it clear that she was not just a passing fling, but the new reality in Alexander's life. But deep in her ambitious mind, Scarlett could not entirely ignore the whispers she heard passing by. Where is Eleanor Vance? What a shame. Poor Eleanor was always such a distinguished lady. Why did everyone insist on talking about that woman? Scarlett had never met her personally. Alexander always said that Eleanor preferred to avoid conflicts and confrontations. To her, this only confirmed her superiority. While Eleanor hit it home, she shone in the halls of high society. What Scarlett did not know was that at that very moment, just a few blocks away, Eleanor Vance was meticulously preparing for her own entry into the Grand Astor Club. And when she arrived, nothing would ever be the same. If you were Alexander, what would you do? Do you believe revenge can be an act of elegance? Leave your opinion in the comments. Part 2. The Strategy in Black Chanel. Eleanor Vance stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room, observing her own image with the analytical coolness of a general planning a battle. At 38, she possessed a mature, sophisticated beauty that contrasted drastically with the obvious, youthful allure of her rival. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, framing a face with classic features that needed no heavy makeup to make an impact. The dress she had chosen for the night was a masterpiece of French haute couture, a black Chanel couture with an impeccable cut, featuring pearl details that ran across the discreet yet elegant neckline. The piece had cost more than many cars, but it wasn't the price that made it special. It was what it represented. Power, class, legitimacy. Everything Scarlett Blake was trying to purchase with borrowed money from another woman's husband. Eleanor knew exactly what was happening at the Grand Astor Club at that moment. She had received no less than 15 calls from concerned friends throughout the week, each eager to be the first to tell her about the public humiliation Alexander was inflicting. What none of them knew was that Eleanor had orchestrated every detail of that situation. "Ma'am, "The car has arrived," announced Maria, her housekeeper for over a decade. The middle-aged woman looked at Eleanor with equal parts admiration and concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she had worn in months. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life, Maria." The truth was that Eleanor had discovered Alexander's betrayal long before any social gossip. Not because she was particularly astute, but because Alexander was shamefully careless. Receipts for expensive restaurants for two when he was supposedly at work meetings, charges for jewelry and dresses on his corporate card, a woman's perfume on his clothes that was definitely not hers. During the first few months, Eleanor felt the familiar pain of betrayal, the wound to her ego, the feeling of inadequacy, the questioning of where she had failed as a wife. But then, on a particularly melancholy Tuesday afternoon, something shifted. She was looking through a wedding photo album when she came across an image of herself on her wedding day. In that photo, she radiated a light that had been lost during the years of marriage. It was at that moment that Eleanor grasped a liberating truth. She hadn't lost Alexander because she failed as a wife. She had lost Alexander because he failed as a man. Based on this epiphany, Eleanor began to plan. Not a vulgar, emotional revenge, but a cold, surgical strategy that would not only expose the couple's farce, but also guarantee her the freedom she had subconsciously desired for years. For the next 6 months, Eleanor watched. She discreetly hired a private investigator, not to confirm the betrayal she already knew, but to meticulously document it. Photographs, videos, hotel records, even recordings of compromising conversations Alexander and Scarlett had in public places, thinking they were safe in the bubble of arrogance they had created. More importantly, Eleanor used this time to reorganize her finances. Alexander always assumed she was financially dependent on him, an ignorant, sexist assumption. In reality, Eleanor had inherited a considerable fortune from her paternal grandmother, real estate investments and stocks that she managed personally without involving her husband. Furthermore, she had her own successful art consulting business. During the months of her absence from social events, Eleanor had also dedicated herself to herself in a way she hadn't in years. A personal trainer 3 times a week, regular beauty treatments, a complete wardrobe overhaul. Not to win Alexander back. That bridge was irreversibly burned. But for herself. Tonight, specifically, Eleanor had chosen the Legacy Foundation Gala for precise strategic reasons. It was an event that brought together the core of the New York elite, people who had known her family for decades and who respected her lineage and class. It was also an environment where unwritten social rules played in her favor. As much as they tolerated male excesses in private, the public exposure of a marital betrayal was still considered an act of bad taste that deserved to be punished. Most crucially, Eleanor knew Alexander would bring Scarlett to the ball. It was she herself who, through a mutual friend, had planted the idea in the ambitious young mistress's head. The Legacy Foundation Gala is the most important event of the year, she had strategically commented during a luncheon. That's where society truly presents itself. Eleanor's private chauffeur, John, was waiting for her at the building entrance. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance," he greeted, opening the door of the black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "You look dazzling tonight." "Thank you, John." To the Grand Astor Club. During the 30-minute drive, Eleanor mentally reviewed every detail of her plan. She had scheduled her arrival for the exact moment the ball was at its peak, when all the important guests were present, when the social photographers were most active, when Alexander and Scarlett were most relaxed and confident. Eleanor's phone vibrated with a message from Leonore, the wife of a judge and one of her oldest friends. "Darling, they are shamelessly exhibiting themselves. She is practically announcing herself as your replacement. Come fast and end this farce. Eleanor smiled, reading the message. Leonore had always been her fiercest ally, a woman of the old guard who wholeheartedly believed that certain social traditions and hierarchies should be respected. To Leonore, Scarlett was nothing more than a classless social climber, trying to occupy a place that didn't belong to her. Other messages followed, all from indignant friends, reporting on Alexander and Scarlett's behavior. She's wearing a red Valentino, completely inappropriate for a charity event, wrote Patricia. He introduced her as a special consultant, but she herself corrected him, saying they were much more intimate, added Victoria Albright. Every message confirmed that Eleanor's plan was working perfectly. Alexander and Scarlett were digging their own grave with an almost comical enthusiasm. "We are arriving, Mrs. Vance," John announced, interrupting her reflections. Eleanor looked out the window and saw the golden lights of the Grand Astor Club shining in the night. Dozens of luxury cars were parked at the entrance, while paparazzi and social photographers awaited the arrival of important figures. The red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the main door, flanked by lush floral arrangements. "John, give me 5 more minutes," Eleanor requested. "I want my entrance to be memorable." She opened her Hermes bag and checked the contents one last time. In addition to the usual items, there was a discreet flash drive containing all the documents and evidence she had compiled on Alexander and Scarlett. She didn't plan to use it tonight, but it was always good to have an ace up her sleeve. Eleanor also carried something far more powerful than any physical evidence: the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. For 15 years, she had been the discreet, perfect wife who solved problems without making waves. Tonight, she would be the opposite. "Now, John, it's showtime." The driver smiled through the rearview mirror. He had watched Eleanor grow from a shy young woman to a powerful one, and he knew this night would be historic. When the Mercedes stopped in front of the Grand Astor Club, a murmur spread among the photographers. Eleanor Vance had become a mysterious figure in recent months. Her absence from social events had generated speculation and conspiracy theories. Now, her reappearance promised answers. John got out of the car and walked calmly to the rear door. The silence was almost palpable. Even the most seasoned paparazzi knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. When the door opened and Eleanor stepped onto the red carpet, there was a moment of suspended time. She was radiant in a way no one remembered seeing her before. More confident, more commanding, more genuinely powerful. Flashes erupted in a frantic sequence as Eleanor walked slowly toward the entrance. Every step was calculated. Every movement was a declaration. She acknowledged the crowd with elegant waves, but did not stop for interviews. There was more important work to be done. At the club entrance, the doorman greeted her with an almost feudal bow. "Mrs. Vance, what an honor to have you back with us." "The pleasure is mine, Robert. A beautiful night, isn't it?" As she walked through the club's corridors toward the main ballroom, Eleanor could hear the crowd's murmur inside. Music, laughter, animated conversations. The sound of people who had no idea their lives were about to be turned upside down. She paused in front of the ballroom's double doors. She adjusted her pearl necklace one last time and took a deep breath. On the other side of those doors were Alexander and Scarlett, likely still basking in the attention they received, still believing they had conquered something important. They had no idea that the true queen had arrived to claim her throne. Part 3. The elite duel. The ballroom of the Grand Astor Club was at its peak when Eleanor Vance made her entrance. The orchestra played a Strauss waltz. Couples danced elegantly in the center of the hall, and the hum of conversations created a symphony of polite courtesy. Alexander was near the bar, laughing heartily at a joke David Shaw had just told him, when the first whisper reached his ears. "Eleanor has arrived." The smile froze on his face. He slowly turned, searching for the familiar figure of his wife, but couldn't find her in the crowd. Part of his brain still expected it to be a rumor. "Alexander!" Leonore's voice sounded behind him like the harbinger of a storm. "Your wife looks stunning tonight." He turned and saw Leonore, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that high society women used when they were about to witness the public humiliation of someone they deemed deserving. It was then he saw her. Eleanor was entering the main hall with the serenity of a queen returning to her palace after a long exile. There was something different about her, an aura of power and self-possession that Alexander did not recall ever seeing before. The black Chanel gown hugged her silhouette with mathematical elegance. The pearls on her neck caught the light hypnotically, and her brown hair gleamed like polished silk. But the most impressive thing was her posture. Eleanor did not walk. She glided. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. And wherever she passed, conversation ceased, gazes turned, and a respectful silence spread like ripples in a pond. Alexander felt his mouth go dry. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Eleanor dominate a room that way. It was as if she had gone from being a supporting character to the protagonist of her own life. On the other side of the room, Scarlett was recounting an anecdote to a group of businessmen's wives when she noticed her audience had become distracted. They were all looking at something, or someone, behind her. "What is it?" she asked, turning to follow the direction of their gazes. And then she saw her too. Scarlett had often fantasized about what her first encounter with Alexander's legitimate wife would be like. In her fantasies, Eleanor would be a faded woman, visibly aged, clearly inferior in every way that mattered. The reality was a brutal shock. The woman walking toward her radiated a natural elegance that no amount of money could buy. There was something almost aristocratic in her posture, an innate class that suddenly made Scarlett feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Eleanor greeted the guests with the perfect grace of someone born into that world. A kiss on Victoria Albright's cheek, a warm handshake with the senator, a kind word for the judge's wife. Every interaction reaffirmed her position in the social hierarchy, not as the betrayed wife seeking sympathy, but as the grand dame returning to her rightful place. "Eleanor, darling!" Patricia's voice rang out like a crystal bell. The judge's wife approached with open arms, clearly moved to see her friend after months of absence. "What immense joy to have you back. We missed you terribly." "Patricia, you're radiant as always," Eleanor replied, her voice melodious with a tone of genuine affection. "How are you, Robert? I heard the Supreme Court appointment was confirmed." Yes, we are very happy. But tell us about you. Where have you been hiding all these months? You were missed so much." Eleanor smiled with mysterious elegance. "I was taking care of some personal affairs. Sometimes a woman needs time to reorganize her priorities." The response was diplomatically vague, but charged with a subtext that did not go unnoticed by the women present. They all knew about the situation with Alexander and Scarlett, and now they began to understand that Eleanor's absence from social events had not been due to humiliation or despair, but to strategy. While Eleanor spoke, Alexander remained paralyzed near the bar. Part of him wanted to approach, greet her as if nothing had changed, maintain the facade of a harmonious marriage they had always presented in public. The other part, the cowardly, guilty part, just wanted to disappear. The decision was taken by Scarlett. The young woman, fueled by a toxic mix of jealousy, and youthful arrogance, decided she would not be eclipsed by an older woman, no matter how elegant. After all, she was the one with Alexander now. She was the one wearing the expensive gifts, the one occupying his bed, the one with future plans with him. "Alexander," she whispered, pulling on his arm. "Let's go greet your wife. It's the polite thing to do." Alexander swallowed. Scarlett, maybe it's not the best time. Nonsense, she retorted, already walking toward the group surrounding Eleanor. Scarlett did not realize she was about to commit the most catastrophic mistake of her young life. In her limited mind, this would be the moment of her official coronation, when she would present herself as Alexander's new woman to the former wife, definitively establishing the new hierarchical order. Eleanor saw the couple approach long before they reached her. Her eyes met Alexander's for a brief moment, and he visibly flinched under her gaze. It was as if she could see right through him, seeing all the guilt, all the shame, all the cowardice he carried. Eleanor! Alexander forced a smile as he approached the group. His voice came out higher than he intended. What a surprise to see you here. The silence that followed was deafening. All nearby conversations ceased. All eyes turned toward the trio, and even the orchestra seemed to lower its volume. It was as if the entire ballroom was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Eleanor looked at Alexander for a long moment, her expression perfectly serene. When she finally spoke, her voice had the cutting coldness of tempered steel. Alexander, what an interesting coincidence. I thought you were in Chicago this week. An important meeting with investors. Isn't that what you said? The lie was exposed with surgical elegance. Alexander had fabricated that excuse to justify his absence from home in recent days, when in fact, he was at a luxury hotel with Scarlett, preparing for the ball. Now, confronted with his own dishonesty in public, he stammered, The meeting was canceled, last minute." "What a shame," Eleanor murmured, her tone suggesting the opposite. "Well, at least you didn't miss an event as important as this." It was then that Scarlett decided to intervene. The young woman, misinterpreting the moment and thinking Eleanor was being submissive by not directly confronting the situation, took a step forward with a smile that was meant to be understanding, but sounded condescending. "You must be Eleanor," she said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured red nails. "I'm Scarlett Blake. I've heard so much about you." The group around them collectively held their breath. It was a moment of tension so palpable that even guests further away began to approach discreetly, sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. Eleanor looked at Scarlett's extended hand for a moment that seemed eternal. Then, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, she delicately shook it. "Scarlett, yes, I've heard a lot about you too." The phrase was delivered with such elegance that it took Scarlett a few seconds to realize the venom it contained. "Alexander told me you worked together," Eleanor continued, her voice maintaining the perfectly polite tone of high society. "Something about project development consulting?" Alexander opened his mouth to reply, but Scarlett interrupted him, clearly eager to establish her true position. "Oh, we are much more than colleagues," she giggled, a high-pitched sound that resonated uncomfortably in the ballroom's silence. "In fact, Alexander and I have a very special relationship." The words left her mouth with the confidence of someone who thought she was revealing a truth that would give her power over the situation. Instead, she had just fallen into the most elegant trap ever constructed at a New York social event. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, as if processing particularly interesting information. "Ah, I see," she said, her voice still maintaining that deadly courtesy. "How brave of you to make it public like this." The word brave was delivered in such a way that it sounded exactly like its antonym. Scarlett began to realize something was wrong, but her youth and inexperience prevented her from fully decoding the nuances of the conversation. Alexander, on the other hand, was pale as a sheet. He knew Eleanor well enough to recognize the danger signs, the overly polite tone, the smile that didn't reach her eyes, the upright, controlled posture. She was furious, but expressing that fury through the refined codes of high society, which made her infinitely more dangerous than any emotional outburst. "Eleanor," he tried to intervene again, Perhaps we should— Oh, Alexander, she interrupted gently. There's no need for embarrassment among civilized people. She turned back to Scarlett with renewed interest. Tell me, darling, how long have you two been working together? Scarlett, interpreting the question as an opportunity to establish her supremacy, replied with youthful pride. About 8 months. Alexander has been a wonderful mentor. Mentor, Eleanor repeated, as if savoring the word. What an interesting term to describe the relationship. The air in the ballroom was so charged with tension that even the waiters stopped circulating with champagne trays. Dozens of eyes were fixed on the trio, and Julian Hale, the society columnist, was observing everything from a strategic distance, clearly taking mental notes for his column the next day. Leonore Albright approached the group with a smile that promised trouble. Eleanor, darling, what a stunning dress. Chanel, isn't it? I've always envied your impeccable taste in fashion. Thank you, Leonore. You know how it is. Some pieces never go out of style, do they? The implication was clear. True elegance is timeless, unlike the passing trends certain younger people exhibit. Scarlett, finally starting to realize she was being subtly attacked, decided to counterattack. Your dress is beautiful too, she told Eleanor, her tone trying to sound generous but failing miserably. Very classic. It must have been terribly expensive. The comment was a grotesque blunder, suggesting that Eleanor cared about the price of her clothes, or worse, that she needed to justify her spending, was a display of poor class that made several women present gasp in shock. Eleanor smiled. This time, a truly dangerous smile. My dear, she said, her voice soft as velvet, but sharp as a razor. When you have true class, the price becomes irrelevant. It is something you are either born with or you never acquire. The phrase fell upon Scarlett like a silent bomb. For a moment, the young woman was speechless, slowly processing the fact that she had been publicly outclassed in the most elegant way possible. Alexander tried to intervene again, his voice desperate. Well, I think we should all— Alexander, Eleanor interrupted him again, this time turning her full attention to him. Since we are all gathered here, so, casually, perhaps it's a good time to clarify a few things. The entire ballroom seemed to have paused. Not even the sound of the orchestra could be heard, as if the musicians also wanted to hear what would happen next. Clarifications are always welcome, murmured Leonore Albright, barely containing her excitement. Eleanor adjusted the pearls at her neck with deliberately slow movements, like a matador preparing the final thrust. You see, her voice now taking on a tone of genuine amusement, there are certain illusions that must be dispelled before they cause more embarrassment than they already have. Scarlett felt a chill of panic run down her spine. There was something about Eleanor's demeanor, an absolute confidence, an almost predatory serenity, that suggested she knew something monumental, something that would completely change the game. I don't understand, Scarlett gasped. Oh, darling, Eleanor retorted, her smile now genuinely radiant. You will understand. All of you will. It was then that Eleanor Vance began to methodically, elegantly, and irreversibly destroy the lives of everyone who had underestimated her power. Part 4. The Ruthless Truth. Alexander, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the ballroom's silence like glass against glass. Since we are among friends, why don't you tell Scarlett about our conversation last night? Alexander's face paled to a color that rivaled the pearls on his wife's neck. His eyes widened in absolute panic, because there had been no conversation with Eleanor the night before, nor on any night in the last few weeks. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but his trembling voice betrayed his nervousness. Eleanor tilted her head with feigned curiosity, as if genuinely surprised by her husband's response. No? How odd. Perhaps my memory is failing me. She paused dramatically, scanning the circle of spectators that had formed around them. Or perhaps you forgot to mention to your mentor that we are still married." The word mentor was delivered with such irony that several people in the group had to stifle nervous giggles. Scarlett felt the blood rush to her face, finally realizing she was being publicly ridiculed. "Of course we know you're married," Scarlett said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "But marriages evolve, don't they? Sometimes people find happiness in different places." Eleanor nodded with a graceful tilt of her head. Evolution, a fascinating concept. She turned to Leonore Albright conspiratorially. "Leonore, you, married to Robert for 30 years, have you experienced this evolution?" Leonore laughed, a crystalline sound filled with aristocratic malice. "Never, darling. Robert knows his place very well." The comment was a direct stab at Alexander's masculinity, suggesting he had failed as a man by not maintaining order in his house. Several men present coughed uncomfortably, while their wives exchanged glances of approval. Victoria Albright joined the group, clearly unwilling to miss the spectacle. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you at our events again," she said with feigned effusiveness. "Your presence always raises the level of any occasion." "That's very kind, Victoria. I was just explaining to young Scarlett how certain traditions work in our society." Scarlett felt increasingly cornered. There was something about the way these women spoke, always polite, always elegant, yet carrying a subtle venom that she could not counteract because she did not master the necessary social codes. "Traditions can be outdated," she said, trying to sound sophisticated. "The modern world allows people to be more authentic in their relationships." The silence that followed was so deep, you could hear the clinking of the chandelier crystals swaying gently with the air-conditioning breeze. Eleanor looked at Scarlett for a long moment, like a feline studying its prey before the fatal pounce. "Authenticity," she repeated slowly. "What a powerful word. You are right, dear. Authenticity is key." She paused, her smile turning predatory. "That's why I think it's time we were completely authentic about this situation." Alexander tried desperately to intervene. "Eleanor, perhaps this isn't the place." "Oh, but it is exactly the right place," she interrupted, her voice still maintaining that deadly courtesy. "After all, it was here you chose to make your association public. It's only fair to clarify a few details for our dear friends." Julian Hale had discreetly moved closer, his expression that of a journalist, scenting the story of the century. Other guests also approached, creating an ever-widening circle around the central trio. "You see," Eleanor continued, addressing the audience directly, "Dear Scarlett believes she conquered my husband's heart through her youth and authenticity." She paused for dramatic effect. "What she doesn't know is that Alexander has a very specific pattern when it comes to his extramarital affairs." Scarlett's eyes widened, suddenly realizing she was about to discover something devastating. "A pattern?" Leonore asked, clearly enjoying the moment. "Oh yes, young, ambitious women, from humble backgrounds, easily dazzled by expensive gifts and promises of social ascent." Eleanor listed the characteristics with the precision of a scientist cataloging specimens. "In the last 15 years, there have been at least, let me see, 6 of them." The number fell upon Scarlett like a hammer. She wasn't special. She wasn't unique. She was just the most recent in a long line of temporary replacements. Alexander was visibly desperate. "Eleanor, please!" "Oh, Alexander, don't be modest," she said with false admiration. "You have a special talent for finding these girls, always with the same profile. Receptionists, secretaries, flight attendants, young, impressionable women who mistake male attention for true love." Patricia Albright couldn't contain a giggle. "And what happened to the other 5, darling?" "Well," Eleanor replied, as if recounting a funny anecdote at a tea party, "some were discreetly dismissed when they started making inconvenient demands. Others realized for themselves that they weren't as special as they imagined. 1 or 2 even managed advantageous marriages with more available men." Scarlett felt the world spin around her. Everything she had believed about her relationship with Alexander, her uniqueness, their future plans, her privileged position, was crumbling like a house of cards. But the thing is, Eleanor continued, speaking directly to Scarlett now, you made one mistake none of the others made. What mistake? The question came out as a choked whisper. You thought you had won. The words fell upon Scarlett with the weight of a judicial sentence. She looked around, seeing for the first time the expressions of the guests. Not admiration or envy, as she had imagined, but pity mixed with aristocratic disdain. Alexander never told me about the others, she stammered, turning to him for a denial, an explanation, anything to restore her reality. Alexander couldn't meet her eyes. His guilt was etched onto his face like a tattoo. Of course he didn't tell you, Eleanor said softly. Why would he? It would ruin the fantasy he creates for each of you. The fantasy that you are special, that you are different, that this time it's true love. Leonor Albright shook her head with theatrical disapproval. Men can be so cruel, can't they, leading these poor girls to believe in fairy tales. The cruelty, Eleanor said, is not in having extramarital affairs. Powerful men have always had mistresses. It's almost a tradition. The cruelty lies in creating false expectations, in making these women believe they can occupy a place that was never intended for them. Scarlett finally exploded. And what is that place? That of the submissive wife who accepts everything in silence. The entire ballroom held its breath. It was the first time anyone had directly confronted Eleanor, and everyone wanted to see how she would respond. Eleanor smiled. Not the elegant, controlled smile she had maintained all night, but a genuine, almost amused one. "Oh, my sweet girl," she said, her voice tinged with a blend of pity and condescension. "You really don't understand, do you? Do you think I'm here, as the humiliated wife, trying to win back an unfaithful husband?" She paused. Her eyes scanned all the faces around her. "I didn't come here to fight for Alexander. I came here to give him back to you." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the sound of the waiter's shoes on the marble could be heard. "Give him back?" Scarlett repeated. Utterly confused. "Yes, darling. You can keep him." Eleanor made an elegant gesture with her hand, as if delivering an undesirable gift. "In fact, I insist you keep him. After all, you both deserve each other." Alexander finally found his voice. "Eleanor, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about freedom, Alexander. Yours and mine." She opened her Hermes bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You should receive official notification on Monday." The envelope passed from hand to hand, like a grande without a pin. Alexander held it with trembling fingers, his face expressing absolute shock. "But we never even discussed this?" "Yes, we did. For 8 months, Alexander. Every time you came home smelling of another woman's perfume. Every time you lied about where you had been. Every time you treated me like a piece of furniture that decorates the house but doesn't participate in the life happening inside it." Eleanor's voice remained serene, but there was tempered steel in every word. The conversation had been long and unilateral, but it happened. Scarlett looked at Alexander, expecting him to protest, to declare his love, to confirm the future plans they had made together. Instead, he looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. "How much do you want?" was the first thing he managed to say. The question revealed so much about his character that several women present made barely disguised gestures of disgust. "Oh, Alexander," Eleanor said, shaking her head with feigned sadness. "Always reducing everything to money. I don't want your money, darling. I have my own." "Your own?" "Yes. Grandmother Beatrice's inheritance, which you always assumed was insignificant, because it was just women's things like properties and stocks. In reality, it's worth more than your company." She smiled. Much more. The shock on Alexander's face was comical. For 15 years, he had assumed he was the sole provider of the family, the only one with significant resources. Discovering that his wife was not only financially independent, but potentially richer than he was a devastating blow to his male ego. Furthermore, Eleanor continued casually, my art consulting business has grown quite a bit in recent years. International clients, you know, people who value authenticity and experience. Scarlett finally understood the full dimension of her humiliation. She had gambled everything on a man she now discovered wasn't even half the prize she had imagined him to be. So you give us your blessing, she stammered, trying to find some thread of dignity to cling to. Oh, darling, it's not exactly a blessing, Eleanor replied with deadly sweetness. It's more like returning a defective product to the store. The phrase resonated through the ballroom like a gunshot. Several people laughed openly, unable to contain their reaction to the brutal elegance of the retort. Alexander finally exploded. Eleanor, you can't humiliate me like this in public. Humiliate you? She'd appeared genuinely surprised. Alexander, darling, I've done nothing but speak the truth. If the truth is humiliating, perhaps the problem is not mine. Julian Hale approached with his social predator smile. Eleanor, may I have a statement for my column? Of course, Julian. She turned to him with the grace of a seasoned actress. You may say that I am beginning a new chapter in my life. Sometimes, when a door closes, we realize it was actually keeping us captive in a place too small for our dreams. And future plans? I'm moving to Paris next week. I have some interesting projects waiting for me there. The word Paris landed on Alexander as a final sentence. Eleanor wasn't just divorcing him. She was literally fleeing the country, putting an ocean between them. Scarlett, attempting one last desperate move, said, Well, at least now Alexander and I can be happy together, without secrets or lies. Eleanor looked at her with a mix of pity and amusement. Oh, my sweet, naive girl, she said, her voice filled with an almost maternal condescension. Do you really believe a man who cheated on his wife with you won't cheat on you with another? The truth of the statement hit Scarlett like a punch to the gut. She looked at Alexander, searching for some sign of denial, some guarantee of future fidelity. Instead, he seemed to shrink further, clearly unwilling to publicly commit to her after the night's disaster. The lack of support was the final straw. Scarlett realized she had lost not only the battle against Eleanor, but also any chance of a future with Alexander. He was too cowardly to defend her when she needed him, too weak to take responsibility for his own actions. It was in that moment of absolute silence that Eleanor Vance delivered the final blow. Well, Eleanor said, adjusting the pearls at her neck with an elegant final gesture. It was a pleasure clarifying all of this. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some dear friends to bid farewell to before my trip. She turned to leave, but stopped as if recalling something important. Oh, and Scarlett? The young woman looked up with hope, perhaps believing Eleanor would offer some word of reconciliation or advice. The red dress looks beautiful on you, but for charity events, more subdued colors are more appropriate. It's a matter of social etiquette. The final critique was delivered with such elegance that even the most seasoned observers needed a few seconds to fully process the brutality of the comment. Eleanor had just given an etiquette lesson in the middle of a public humiliation, definitively establishing the social hierarchy between them. Scarlett stood still, paralyzed by shame, as Eleanor walked away with grace. Alexander remained by her side, but it was obvious to all that he was in shock, still processing the speed with which his life had collapsed. Julian Hale watched the scene with the keen eye of someone who had just witnessed the social story of the year. He was already mentally drafting the headline, The Elegant Revenge, How Eleanor Vance Turned Humiliation into Triumph at the season's most talked about ball. Part 5. The Unsurpassable Legacy. 3 years later, The apartment in the 16th arrondissement overlooked the Eiffel Tower and was decorated with a perfect blend of French elegance and sophistication. Eleanor Vance, now Eleanor Dubois, sat on the terrace, sipping coffee while watching her 2-year-old twins, Henry and Beatrice, play in the private garden. Pierre Dubois walked onto the terrace carrying a tray with fresh croissants and the morning paper. "Mon amour," he said, kissing Eleanor's forehead gently. "There is an interesting article here about America." Eleanor smiled, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. At 38, she radiated a happiness she had never experienced during her 15 years of marriage to Alexander. Pierre was not just a better husband, he was a true partner, someone who respected her intelligence and ambition as much as he admired her beauty. What kind of article? About corporate bankruptcies? It seems a real estate developer called Sterling Ventures closed its doors last month. Alexander? Apparently. The article mentions financial mismanagement and lawsuits. The owner, Alexander Sterling, is under investigation for tax irregularities. Eleanor felt no pleasure in the news. That phase of her life was completely over. But there was a certain poetic justice in the fact that Alexander, who had always considered himself financially superior to her, had lost everything due to his own incompetence. "And the young woman he was with that night at the Grand Astor Club?" asked Pierre, who knew the whole story. "Scarlett." Eleanor mused for a moment. "I heard she married a dentist in Miami. Apparently she learned the lesson of not betting on losing horses." Pierre laughed, a rich, warm sound that resonated on the terrace. "You are terrible, darling, but it is poetic justice, as we say." Henry ran toward the table, speaking an adorable mixture of English and French. "Mama, look, I picked a flower for you." Eleanor lifted her son, accepting the small daisy he had gathered in the garden. Beatrice soon joined them, demanding equal attention. "Mes petits trésors," Pierre murmured, watching the scene with obvious adoration. This was the life Eleanor had built for herself, not as revenge against Alexander, but as a reward for her own courage. She had transformed betrayal into liberation, humiliation into opportunity, and an ending into a new beginning. Dubois' gallery had become one of the most prestigious in Paris under her curatorship, and she was expecting her third child, a girl they would name Sophie, after the grandmother who had left her the inheritance that made her independence possible. As she watched her children play in the Parisian garden, Eleanor reflected on the night at the Grand Astor Club 3 years ago. She had planned every detail of that public humiliation, but now she realized that the true victory had not been destroying Alexander and Scarlett that night. The true victory was this: a life built on her own terms, with a man who loved her completely, children who filled her heart, and a career that satisfied her soul. In the end, Eleanor Vance had discovered that the best revenge is not the destruction of your enemies, but the construction of a life so spectacular that it makes everything they did to try to diminish you utterly irrelevant. Final reflection and call to action. Closing. The story of Eleanor Vance teaches us that regret only has value when it turns into action. Her story is not about winning a battle, but about conquering a personal empire. Final, meaningful question. Was Eleanor's most powerful moment the public humiliation of Scarlett and Alexander at the club? Or was it her life, 3 years later, where she no longer felt pleasure in their collapse? Leave your comment below. If this story inspires you to take control of your own life, like and share. And of course, subscribe for more stories of queens who stage a comeback. What would you do if the life you destroyed returned to shatter yours? Imagine this. You're on top of the world, in the most exclusive restaurant in New York City, celebrating your latest victory with your new conquest. You feel invincible. But suddenly, across the room, amidst the clinking of glasses and hushed laughter, you see her. Your ex-wife, Sarah, radiant, pregnant, and dining with Elias Sterling, a mogul so powerful he could wipe you off the map with a snap of his fingers. In that instant, everything you thought you'd won crumbles. The price of your betrayal isn't money. It's the life you ruined, now flourishing without you. Tonight is about to become a judgment. Before we dive into this tale of betrayal and billion-dollar revenge, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. What's the biggest betrayal you've ever witnessed in a business deal? The restaurant, the Zenith, was less a place to eat and more a declaration of status. It soared on the 60th floor of a glass and steel needle piercing the Manhattan sky, a silent testament to the gods of finance and influence. Alexander Alex Thorne felt at home here. The hushed reverence, the tinkling of Christoffel silver against Bernadotte china, the panoramic view of the city, glittering like a scattered rug of diamonds. It was the native tongue of his success. Beside him, Jocelyn. Joss Day was the perfect accessory. Her crimson dress clung to a figure sculpted by discipline and ambition. Her laugh was a practiced melody, light and effervescent, designed to charm, not to challenge. She touched his arm, her nails painted the same shade as her dress. "You seem distracted, darling?" she purred, her voice a soft rumble. "Did the deal hit a snag?" "The deal," Alex said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was a masterpiece. He had just closed the acquisition of a smaller tech firm, a ruthless yet brilliant maneuver that would net him millions and make headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Tonight was meant to be the celebration, the validation. He raised his glass of Macallan 20 to masterpieces, Joss toasted with her champagne flute, and to the artist. As their glasses touched, Alex's gaze drifted. It was a habit he couldn't break, scanning a room for threats, for opportunities, for he never expected to find her. Not here. Not now. But there she was, Dr. Serafina Sarah Ellis, his Sarah, his ex-wife. She was seated at a corner table, the most coveted in the restaurant, framed by the sparkling constellation of the city below. The soft lighting caught the delicate curve of her cheek, the elegant line of her neck. She wore a simple yet stunning sapphire blue dress that draped beautifully over her figure. A figure that was, unmistakably, pregnant. The air rushed out of Alex's lungs in a silent, violent gasp. Pregnant. The word detonated in his mind, shattering the calm, sterile environment he had so carefully constructed for himself. The whiskey turned to acid in his stomach. He remembered their last conversation, a shouting match in his minimalist penthouse, where he'd called her dream of a family a chain, and her work as a pediatrician an unprofitable hobby. He had thrown away a life with her for this, for Joss, for the thrill of the new, the easy, the adoring. And Sarah was not alone. Seated opposite her was Elias Sterling. If Alex was a prince of the city's financial scene, Elias was its reigning king. Older, with a quiet intensity that unnerved even the most arrogant traders. Sterling ran a private equity firm that could swallow Alex's entire company without so much as a burp. His reputation was mythical, part Warren Buffett, part ghost. He rarely appeared in public, and when he did, it was with purpose. He was leaning forward, listening to Sarah with a look of focus so deep and gentle that Alex's blood ran cold. He wasn't looking at her like a business associate. He was looking at her as if she were the only person in the universe. He reached a hand across the table, covering hers. It was a simple, unadorned gesture of intimacy, a gesture Alex hadn't deserved, and therefore had lost. Do you think Alex deserves the life he built? Or is this glimpse of Sarah's new life the karma he earned? Share your thoughts below. Alex, are you all right? Joss's voice cut through his paralysis. She followed his gaze. Her perfectly made-up face tightened. The painted smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Oh, the single word laced with a poisonous mix of surprise and satisfaction. This was the ghost she had always been competing with. And now, here she was. Real, vulnerable, and with another man. Alex felt a primal surge of possessiveness, so potent and irrational it terrified him. That was his wife. That should have been his child, his legacy. He had told himself he didn't want it, that he was free. But seeing it, seeing her, given over to another man, a better man, a more powerful man, felt like a physical blow. Suddenly, Sarah looked up, as if she could feel the weight of his stare. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, met his across the room. There was no hatred in them, no anger, just a flash of something that was infinitely worse. Recognition, followed by a silent, weary dismissal. She held his gaze for a heartbeat, a universe of shared memories passing between them. Late-night talks, lazy Sunday mornings, a shared grief over a miscarriage they never spoke of again. And then she turned back to Elias, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips as she resumed her conversation. She had erased him. In that single, elegant turn, she had reduced him and his whole carefully curated life to background noise, an unimportant shadow on the periphery of her radiant new world. "We're leaving," Alex growled, his voice low. He threw a few $100 bills onto the table, not even looking at the check. "But we just got here," Joss protested, her voice acquiring a whiny tone he was beginning to despise. "I thought we were celebrating." "The celebration is over." He stood up, his chair scraping harshly across the polished floor, the sound of violation of the room's sacred silence. He did not look back at Sarah's table. He couldn't. The sight of her quiet happiness was a mirror reflecting his own profound emptiness, and the image was more than he could bear. He had won the world. But at that moment, looking out at the city he had conquered, Alex Thorne had never felt so bankrupt. And leaving the zenith felt like fleeing the scene of a crime. If you are gripped by this story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The cold night air hit Alex like a slap, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled perfection of the restaurant. He strode past the waiting town cars. He needed to walk. He needed the brutalist architecture of Midtown NYC to match the jagged edges of his thoughts. "What was that all about?" Joss demanded, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavement as she struggled to keep up. The practiced charm was gone, replaced by raw, undisguised frustration. "What do you think it was?" Alex snapped back, his voice tight. "So you saw your ex? Big deal. She's moved on. Isn't that what you wanted?" Joss's words were meant to be reassuring, but they sounded like an accusation. "You got what you wanted. So why are you acting like this?" Because he hadn't wanted this. He wanted Sarah to be miserable. He wanted her waiting by the phone, longing, regretting her decision to finally draw a line. He didn't want to see her flourishing, pregnant and beautiful, on the arm of a man like Elias Sterling. He wanted to win the breakup, and he had just discovered, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that he had lost. "It's not about her moving on," he lied, shoving his hands into his pockets. "It's about Sterling, Elias Sterling. Dining with him isn't casual, it's a power move." It was a weak deflection, but it was all he had. Joss seized on it. A power move? Against you? Alex, don't be paranoid. She's a pediatrician, not a corporate spy. But was she? His mind, trained to see angles and leverage in everything, started spinning. Elias Sterling was not known for sentimentality. Every move he made was calculated. What if this wasn't a coincidence? What if Sarah, scorned and furious, had sought out the only man in NYC who could truly hurt him? The idea was terrifying, and, in a twisted way, flattering. It meant he still mattered. He recalled the final months of their marriage. It wasn't just the arguments about a family. It was the silences. It was the way Sarah looked at him when he came home late, smelling of expensive perfume and moral compromise. He had been working on the Beaumont deal, a hostile takeover that was legally gray and ethically black. He had bent rules, exploited loopholes, and ruined a small, family-run competitor to pull it off. He had told himself it was just business. Sarah had seen the papers he carelessly left on his home office desk. She had a mind as sharp as any lawyer, and an even sharper conscience. "This is not just business, Alex," she had said. Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You have a document outlining the pension fund you plan to dissolve. It's people's lives, their retirement. You can't just erase it. It's a liability on the balance sheet, Sarah. It's what you have to do to make the company viable. You don't understand." He had been dismissive, arrogant. "No," she had whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand perfectly. The man I married never would have done this." That was the real beginning of the end. The affair with Joss had only been the final, clumsy, brutal act. He'd sought out Joss because she didn't challenge him. She applauded him. She saw his ruthlessness not as a moral failing, but as a sign of strength. She was drawn to the same thing that repelled Sarah. He had built his new life on that foundation, an architecture of lies, he told himself, that he was stronger without Sarah's moral compass, freer without her expectations. Now, seeing her with Sterling, the entire edifice threatened to collapse. "I'm going to the office," he said abruptly, hailing a cab. "The office? It's nearly midnight." Joss's voice was incredulous. "Alex, this is our night." He turned to look at her, the streetlights casting harsh shadows on his face. "There is no our night right now. I have work to do." He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, quickly masked by anger. For a moment, he felt a pang of something. Not guilt, but a weary recognition of the pattern. He was doing it again, pushing away intimacy for the cold comfort of work and control. He climbed into the cab without another word, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, a beautiful statue of his own bad decisions. As the cab pulled away, he watched her shrinking figure in the rearview mirror. He had chosen her for her simplicity, for her lack of judgment. But now, all he could see was the emptiness of it all. She was a reflection of his desires, not a partner in his life. The real partner, the one who saw all of him and tried to call him to be better, was now carrying another man's child. The file, the Beaumont file, felt like a relic from another life. Alex slammed it onto the polished mahogany of his boardroom table. The office, usually his sanctuary, felt like a cage. The panoramic city view, once a symbol of his dominion, now seemed to mock him, every light a reminder of a life happening without him. He had come here to work, to bury himself in the cold, hard logic of numbers and contracts. It was his coping mechanism, but he couldn't focus. The image of Sarah's serene face was etched in his mind, and the quiet, proprietary gaze of Elias Sterling. He checked every article, every financial statement, every rumor he could find on Sterling Investments. Elias was a ghost, just as the rumors claimed. He invested in stable, long-term growth sectors, renewable energy, biotech, logistics. His portfolio was the antithesis of Alex's high-risk, high-reward, scorched-earth tactics. Sterling built things. Alex tore them down and sold the pieces. There was nothing that connected Sterling to Sarah, nothing to suggest this was a targeted attack. It only made it worse. It meant their meeting was organic. It meant Elias Sterling was interested in Sarah for who she was. His phone buzzed. It was Joss. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, he picked up. "What?" "I'm outside your building," she hissed. Her voice was no longer whiny. It was cold, hard steel. "Let me up. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Don't you dare hang up on me, Alex," she snapped. "I am not a disposable toy you can walk away from when you're moody. I gave up my life for you. The least you can do is face me. Or are you going to hide in your tower all night, brooding?" The accusation hit home. He was hiding. With a sigh of resignation, he let her up. When Joss walked into the boardroom, she looked different. The party girl veneer was gone. She had scrubbed off her heavy makeup and her hair was pulled back. She looked tired, but resolute. She wasn't here for an apology. She was here for a reckoning. "What do you want, Joss?" he asked, turning to look out the window, unable to face her. "I want to know what this is," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "What we are. Because tonight, you looked at her, and it was as if I wasn't even there. I've spent the better part of a year bolstering your ego, telling you you made the right choice, that I'm more exciting, more ambitious, more whatever you needed to hear." She took a deep breath. And in 1 second, she undoes it all, just by sitting in a room. "It's complicated," he mumbled. "No, it's not," she countered, stepping closer. "It's simple. You never got over her. You didn't leave her for me. You used me to leave her. There's a difference." The truth of her words was a physical shock. He had never thought of it that way. But she was right. Joss hadn't been the prize. She had been the weapon, the tool he used to finally cut the cord with Sarah, a cord he hadn't been strong enough to cut himself. "And what's worse," Joss continued, her voice dropping, "is that I let you. I told myself that eventually you'd fall in love with me, that once the dust settled, you'd see what you had right in front of you." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "I guess I'm just as foolish as you." Alex finally turned to look at her. He saw for the first time not the mistress, not the accessory, but a woman who had made a desperate gamble and lost. There was a glint of something in her eyes, not just pain, but a deep, calculating intelligence he had always underestimated. "What about the Beaumont deal?" she asked abruptly. The change of subject startled him. "What about it? You told me it was your masterpiece." "You told me it was all above board," she said, her eyes narrowed. "But I've heard things, rumors on the street, that you buried documents, that you leaned on the board, that the only reason it went through was because you hid the long-term pension liabilities from the shareholders." Alex froze. "Where did you hear that?" "I have my sources," she said vaguely. "Is it true, Alex?" It was the same accusation Sarah had made, only this time it didn't come from a place of moral outrage. It came from a place of cold, hard leverage. "That's a dangerous rumor," he said, his voice low and threatening. "The truth is more dangerous," Joss countered. She walked to the boardroom table and picked up the Beaumont file. She held it as if weighing it. "I always wondered what she had that I didn't. Now I know. A conscience, and as it turns out, a backbone." She looked from the file to him, and a slow, chilling smile spread across her face. "You're worried about Elias Sterling coming after your company. Maybe you should worry more about the people already on the inside." Before he could process the implication, she dropped the file back onto the table. "I'm done, Alex. Done being your placeholder. Done waiting for you to see me. I'm going to find a life where I'm the main event, not the distraction." She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. The click of the door closing was as final as a gunshot. Alex stood alone, the silence ringing in his ears. He had walked out on Joss tonight, and she had just walked out on him forever. But she had left behind a grenade. Maybe you should worry more about the people already on the inside. His blood ran cold. Had Joss been collecting information? Was her question about the Beaumont deal a threat? He had seen her as simple, as adoration personified. He had been a fool. He had underestimated everyone. Sarah, Elias, and now, most dangerously, the woman who had shared his bed for the last year. The facade of his perfect, controlled world was cracking, and he had the terrifying sense that the entire structure was about to collapse. The next morning, Alex's office felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night oscillating between fury and a sharp fear. Joss's final dart had destabilized him more than the sight of Sarah and Elias. It was a threat from the inside, the kind he couldn't easily defend against. He called his security chief, a former military intelligence officer named Marcus, and gave a quiet, concise order. "I want a full investigation into Jocelyn Day. Everything. Who she talks to, where her money comes from, every digital footprint she has. And be discreet." Then he turned his attention back to Elias Sterling. If this was a coordinated attack, he needed to find the link. He dug deeper than the public portfolio, into the man's history, and that's when he found it. A single, obscure business article from the early 1990s. The article detailed the collapse of a small, innovative logistics company, Sterling Logistics. It had been driven into bankruptcy after a relentless, hostile takeover by Thorne Global, spearheaded by its legendary, feared founder, Victor Thorne, Alex's father. The CEO of Sterling Logistics had been a young, ambitious man named Daniel Sterling, Elias's father. The air in the room grew dense. This wasn't business. This was a blood feud. Victor Thorne had been a titan, a man who viewed business as war and mercy as a fatal flaw. Alex had spent his whole life trying to live up to his father's impossible standards, adopting his ruthlessness without ever possessing his genius. The ghost of his father haunted the boardroom, a constant, silent judge of Alex's every move. The Beaumont deal was exactly the kind of brutal, efficient play his father would have applauded. Now it appeared the ghosts of his father's wars were returning to torment him. Elias Sterling wasn't just any rival. He was the son of a man his father had destroyed, and he was just seen dining with the one person who held the key to Alex's own ethical compromises. Sarah. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. The sequence of events was too perfect. Sarah, hurt and angry after their divorce, armed with knowledge of the Beaumont deal's irregularities. Elias Sterling, harboring a decades-long grudge, looking for a weakness in the Thorne empire. Had they met by chance, or had Sterling sought her out? His private line buzzed. The caller ID read, E. Sterling. Alex stared at it for a long moment before answering. He had nothing left to lose. "Hello, Elias." "Alex." Sterling's voice was cold and calm, no hint of gloating. "I imagine you're having a difficult morning." "You did this," Alex gasped. "You and her. You set me up." "You set yourself up, Alex," Elias corrected gently. "Your father built an empire on scorched earth, and you tried to do the same. But the world has changed. Men like you, men like your father, have become dinosaurs." Do you think Elias's willingness to help Sarah, despite his own revenge plot, shows he is a better man than Alex? Or is he just a more sophisticated player? "I'm not the asteroid. I'm just a man who believes in building things instead of breaking them," Elias said. "I called for 2 reasons. First, As a professional courtesy, my firm will be making a public tender offer for Thorn Global stock this afternoon. At the fire sale price it will be trading at, I expect we'll have a majority stake by the end of the week. My first act as chairman will be to fully reinstate the Beaumont Pension Fund. The humiliation was absolute. Sterling wasn't just taking his company, he was sanctifying it, cleansing it of Alex's sins. And the second reason? Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah, Elias said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. She had nothing to do with this. She knew nothing about the article, nothing about the whistleblower. The truth is, I did seek her out initially. Your father took everything from my family. I won't lie and say the idea of revenge wasn't appealing. I thought she might be a weapon I could use against you. He paused. But then I met her, and I realized she wasn't a weapon. She is a brilliant, kind, resilient woman who deserved better than to be a pawn in my game or a victim in yours. My feelings for her became very real, very quickly. This, what happened today, was set in motion long before I met her. But now I ask you, man to man, leave her out of this. Do not drag her into your mess. Do not contact her. Do not blame her. She has suffered enough from the Thorn name. Let her have her peace. It was the ultimate defeat. His rival had not only beaten him in business, but had proven himself to be a better man. He had seen Sarah for who she was, while Alex had only seen her as an extension of himself. She's carrying your child, isn't she? Alex asked, the question tasting like ash. There was a long silence on the other end. No, Elias said finally, his voice quiet. She's not. The baby is yours, Alex. From a final, desperate attempt at reconciliation a few weeks before the divorce was final. She was going to tell you, but then she found out about Joss for certain. She decided she would rather raise the child alone than with a man she could no longer respect. The world tilted on its axis. The air left Alex's lungs. His child, not Elias's. His, the legacy he thought he'd forfeited, the life he had thrown away. It was his all along. She does not want you in her life, Alex. Elias's voice was firm, but not cruel. But that child deserves a father. Whether you can become a man worthy of that title, well, that's up to you. Goodbye. The line went dead. Alex slammed the phone down, his hand shaking. He sat in the echoing silence, the city glittering unaware outside his window. He had lost his company, his reputation, his mistress, and the woman he now realized he had always loved. But in the smoking wreckage of his life, a single, terrifying, sacred truth remained. He was going to be a father. His redemption, if it was possible at all, would not be found in a boardroom or a balance sheet. It would be found in the quiet, immense, terrifying challenge of earning his way back, not to Sarah's life, but to the life of the child he never knew he had. The war was over. The surrender had just begun. 3 months later, Alex sat in a sterile waiting room. It wasn't a lawyer's office or a corporate HQ. It was a neutral mediation center, chosen by Sarah's lawyer. The walls were a soothing, anonymous beige. The art was bland and inoffensive. It was a room designed for truces and treaties. The door opened, and she walked in. Sarah was further along now, her belly a beautiful, proud curve beneath a simple gray sweater. Her face was devoid of makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired, but serene. She was alone. No Elias, no lawyers. She sat in the chair opposite him, the table between them feeling like a vast, empty chasm. "My lawyer advised against this," she said, her voice even. "But I needed to do it, for me, and for this boy." She placed a protective hand on her stomach. "Sarah, he began, the 1,000 apologies he'd rehearsed dying on his lips. They all sounded pathetic, inadequate. "Before you say anything," she cut him off, raising a hand. "I'm not here for an apology. I've read about what you've done, cooperating with the SEC, setting up a full restitution fund for the Beaumont employees out of your own pocket. I'm not saying it absolves you, but it's a start." He just nodded, unable to speak. "I'm here to set terms, Alex," she said, her voice gaining strength. "This is our child, and I won't deny her a father. But your fatherhood will be on my terms. There will be a trust administered by a neutral third party for the child's expenses. You will have no direct financial control. You will have visitation rights, starting small, supervised, and only if you continue your therapy and stick to this new path. You will never speak ill of Elias, who has been a pillar for me, and you will never, ever make this child feel like a pawn in some game between us. Your role is simple, to be a father. Nothing more." It was a complete surrender, and it was more than he deserved. "It's fine," he whispered, the word choked with unshed tears. "It's fine, Sarah, whatever you say." She looked surprised by his immediate capitulation. She had clearly come prepared for a fight, for the old Alex to emerge. Seeing this broken, humble version of him seemed to disarm her. For the first time, a flicker of something other than anger or pity crossed her face. It was a ghost of the old warmth, a flash of the woman who had once loved the man he was supposed to have been. "Why, Alex?" she asked, her voice softening. "Why did you do it all? The lies, the affair, the business? Why?" He looked at her, and for the first time he told her the absolute, unvarnished truth. "Because I was a coward," he said, his voice breaking. "I was terrified of failing to be the man you deserved, the husband, the father. I was terrified of being like him." He vaguely gestured to the ghost of his own father. "So, instead of trying and failing, I ran away. I blew it all up on purpose, because burning it down felt more powerful than admitting I was afraid. I chose Joss because she didn't ask me to be better. She only asked me to be rich. It was easier. It was the most cowardly thing I have ever done in my life, and I'm so deeply sorry, Sarah. Not just for hurting you, but for not being brave enough to love you correctly." Sarah watched him, her own eyes glistening. She didn't reach out. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She simply sat there and bore witness to his confession, giving him the dignity of her attention. She stood up slowly. "The baby is a girl," she said softly. "I'm due in 6 weeks. My lawyer will be in touch with yours to finalize the paperwork." She turned and walked to the door. Before she left, she paused, her hand on the handle. "Goodbye, Alex." He watched her go. The word goodbye echoed in the silent room. It wasn't the ending he would have written. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no promise of a second chance. Their love story was over. But as he sat there, stripped of his pride and his empire, he realized this wasn't an end. It was a beginning, the start of a long, difficult road to become a man his daughter might, someday, be proud of. He had lost the world, but he had been given a chance to save a small piece of his own soul. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Can a man truly change, or are we destined to repeat the sins of our fathers? What does it truly mean to pay for your own mistakes? This story is a testament to the fact that our greatest failures can sometimes lead to our deepest beginnings. The path to becoming a worthy father will be long and arduous for Alex, a silent battle fought away from the headlines. Hit the like button, share this video, and tell us in the comments. Do you believe Alex Thorne can truly be redeemed? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next captivating drama. The quiet that followed the mediation was terrifying. It wasn't the empty silence of the penthouse anymore. It was a vast, heavy quiet filled with the weight of responsibility and the knowledge of his failure. Alex moved out of the city and into a temporary, modest apartment near the firm managing the Beaumont Restitution Fund. He worked relentlessly, not on acquisitions, but on full disclosure with the SEC, facing the inevitable criminal charges with a calm he hadn't possessed in years. He spent hours in therapy, systematically dismantling the coward he had become. The man who equated love with loss of control. His entire world was now structured around the terms Sarah had dictated. The Child Support Trust was fully funded and secured by third-party management. He even hired a former pediatric nurse as a consultant to prepare him for the basics of infant care. He knew he couldn't contact Sarah, and the silence was a constant, sharp reminder of his absolute isolation. Then, 6 weeks after their last meeting, the call came from Sarah's attorney. "Mr. Thorne, you have a daughter, Aurora Ellis. She arrived this morning. Both mother and child are stable. Your visit will be scheduled through the social worker, strictly adhering to the terms and bounds outlined in the mediation agreement." Alex hung up the phone. The name Aurora, meaning dawn, ringing in his ears. A new beginning. He had a daughter. He hadn't been there for the labor. He couldn't see her now. And the profound joy was mixed with an equally profound, aching guilt. He wasn't allowed to send flowers or gifts. He wasn't allowed to call the hospital. He waited 4 agonizing days until the social worker, Ms. Evelyn Reed, no relation to Joss, contacted him. "Your first visit will be tomorrow morning at the Neutral Visitation Center. It will last 1 hour and must be fully supervised. Mr. Sterling will be present." Ms. Reed's voice was warm but professional, setting the clear boundaries. He spent the night practicing holding and swaddling a weighted baby doll, his hands, once used to gripping power, now meticulously trying to master gentleness. Meeting Aurora. The 60-minute dawn. The visitation center was a small, brightly lit room with soft toys and primary colors, a stark contrast to the dark wood and marble of Alex's former life. When the door opened, his breath caught. Sarah walked in, her face pale with recovery, but imbued with a quiet, fierce strength. She held a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft white blanket. Aurora. Beside Sarah stood Elias Sterling. Elias nodded to Alex, a respectful, non-hostile acknowledgement that clearly stated, "I am here to ensure the terms are met, nothing more." Alex's eyes were fixed entirely on the baby. She was tiny, impossibly fragile, with a shock of dark hair and large, serious eyes that were a deep, unreadable blue-gray, a perfect blend of his and Sarah's colors. Ms. Reed directed the interaction. "Mr. Thorne, you may sit. Sarah, you can hand the baby to him now." Sarah hesitated for a split second, a flicker of fear in her eyes, before she placed the baby in his arms. The weight of Aurora was less than he expected, but the impact was seismic. She was warm, solid, and utterly real. Alex felt the world narrow down to the soft fabric of her blanket and the sound of her small, even breaths. He looked at her face, the perfect miniature features, the little downturned lips. He looked at her hands, so tiny, gripping nothing. He didn't speak the grand speeches he had prepared. He didn't offer the deep apologies. All the rhetoric of the boardroom vanished. "Hello, Aurora," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your dad." The baby blinked slowly, as if assessing his claim, then let out a tiny, soft sigh and settled against his chest. For the next hour, he simply held her. He rocked her slowly, focusing on the simple, overwhelming truth. This was the life he had thrown away. This was the unconditional love he had been too terrified to accept. Elias and Sarah watched in silence, observing the careful, gentle reverence in his movements. The hour passed in a blur. When Ms. Reed indicated the visit was over, Alex found his hands trembling again. He looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading not for her forgiveness, but for permission to remain connected. "I will see you next week, Sarah," he said, handing the baby back with extreme reluctance. Sarah met his gaze, her expression unyielding but not cruel. "Yes, you will." He left the center, knowing he was still a ruined man in the eyes of the world, but he carried a new, terrifying hope. He had a chance to earn his place, one precious hour at a time. X, earning the silence. A daily redemption. The routine of supervised visits became the anchor of Alex's existence. They were awkward, often silent, and emotionally draining. He wasn't allowed to ask Sarah about her life, about Elias, or about anything personal. He could only ask about Aurora. Is she sleeping well? Has she smiled yet? What are her favorite colors? He learned patience. He learned that being present meant focusing on the mundane, the precise angle to hold a bottle, the quiet dignity of a well-changed diaper, the soothing sound of his own low humming. He learned the difference between the small, tentative smiles of gas and the bright, wide-open recognition of joy. Sarah, observing him, saw not the arrogant magnate, but a man humbled by a love that demanded simplicity. She saw his consistency. He never once missed a visit, never once arrived late, and always came prepared, not with extravagant gifts, but with quiet attention. The most painful visits were the ones where Elias brought Aurora. Elias was never intrusive, always sitting back with a book, but his very presence was a constant reminder to Alex of the superior man who had stepped up when he had run. Alex swallowed the jealousy, knowing he had no right to it. Elias was the benchmark of the man he needed to become, reliable, gentle, and present. One afternoon, during a visit where Aurora was particularly fussy, Sarah stepped in. "Try walking with her," she suggested. A slow, gentle rhythm. Alex took Aurora and began to walk the small perimeter of the room. He walked past Sarah, past Ms. Reed, past the colorful toys. He walked the way he used to walk the perimeters of his enormous, empty boardroom. Only this time, he wasn't looking for threats or opportunities. He was just looking for a rhythm to soothe his daughter. He hummed a half-forgotten tune, the melody his mother used to sing, and slowly, Aurora settled. "What was that song?" Sarah asked, her voice softer than usual. "I don't know the words," Alex admitted. "It was my mother's." Sarah smiled faintly. "It's beautiful." It was the most natural, unguarded moment they had shared since the mediation. It was a bridge built not on words, but on shared history and shared parenthood. Alex realized that redemption was not a singular, dramatic act. It was the daily, quiet work of showing up and being reliable. He had once believed control was power. Now he knew commitment was power. Commitment to the messy, unpredictable, precious life he had once destroyed. The 6 months of supervised visits finally concluded. The last appointment was just Alex and Sarah, without Ms. Reed. "The terms have been met, Alex," Sarah stated, her voice quiet. "The judge will approve unsupervised visits starting next week. The trust is stable. You have honored the agreement." Alex nodded, holding Aurora. "Thank you, Sarah, for the chance. You earned it," she corrected him. "But I need to be clear. This is for Aurora. Our relationship remains fixed. There is no romantic future." "I know," Alex said honestly, "and I won't cross that boundary. My only goal is to be the father she deserves." He looked down at his daughter. Aurora, now 6 months old, looked up and gave him a bright, recognizing smile. He had lost his empire, his reputation, and his romantic future with the woman he loved. But as he walked out of the center that day, holding his daughter, Alex Thorne felt the quiet, profound weight of a new beginning. He was no longer running from his shame. He was walking, head held high, toward his responsibility. Can a man fully heal and redeem himself by dedicating his life to fatherhood, even if he can never regain the love he lost? If this story of true sacrifice and redemption moved you, share this video. Hit the like button and tell us in the comments. What simple act of commitment from Alex convinced Sarah he was truly changing? Subscribe to the channel and join us for the next chapter of Alex and Aurora's journey. 11. The Daughter's Rhythm. Nip Du Kukan Gai. With the termination of supervised visits, Alex's role shifted from a structured visitor to a fledgling co-parent. He rented a small, comfortable house in Brooklyn, deliberately choosing a location that was neither the intimidating grandeur of his past nor the isolated quiet of Sarah's home, but a neutral, accessible ground. His first unsupervised weekend with Aurora was a crash course in humility. He discovered that the weighted baby doll he had trained with did not fight being put down, did not suddenly require a new diaper the moment he settled her for a nap, and certainly did not possess the specific, high-pitched cry that meant, "Only mommy knows what I want." He called Sarah in a panic 3 hours into the first morning. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I don't know what's wrong. I've checked everything. She's fed, dry, she won't stop crying." "Take a deep breath, Alex." Sarah's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Did you check her gums? She might be teething. Find the frozen teether in the blue pouch. If that fails, try the shush sound. Loud, low, like white noise." He followed her instructions mechanically. The frozen teether worked instantly. The shift from wailing to content silence was miraculous. "Thank you," he murmured, leaning against the kitchen counter, sweat on his brow. "I was about to call 911. "You'll figure it out, Alex," Sarah said. "But the first rule of co-parenting is, the emergency button is for medical emergencies only. You figure out the rest." That conversation set the tone for their new reality. Sarah was the unwavering source of knowledge and boundaries. Alex was the persistent, dedicated student. He began charting Aurora's routines meticulously. The exact angle required to hold her for burping, 10 degrees off-center. The precise time she needed to look at the ceiling fan before smiling, 45 seconds. And the specific lullaby that guaranteed sleep, a half-forgotten German folk tune. He learned that the relentless pursuit of information that had once made him a titan was now perfectly channeled into caring for one small, perfect human being. 12. The ghosts of the boardroom. While Alex was gaining ground in fatherhood, his world outside was still catching up. He had successfully pleaded guilty to the financial charges, cooperating fully as promised, avoiding prison time, but facing heavy fines and a public censure that obliterated his standing in the finance world. One afternoon, he received a phone call from an old acquaintance, a minor figure on the Thorn Global board. "Alex, I'm calling because Victor, his father, suffered a stroke last week. He's stable, but the board needs an emergency appointment for chairman. They want you back, Alex. Temporarily. Your cooperation with the SEC made you a symbol of accountability. They need the name, and you're the only one who can stabilize the stock." The offer was a tempting ghost of his past life. He could walk back into the boardroom, take his seat at the head of the table, and reclaim his power. He met Veronica Steele, the journalist who had broken the scandal, and received Joss's anonymous data, for a coffee to gauge the public temperature. "They want you back, Alex?" Veronica raised an eyebrow, noting his plain, non-designer sweater. "The market has a short memory for fraud, but a long memory for drama. They don't want the old Alex. They want the narrative of the redeemed hero to sell stock. They want the responsible father to manage their assets." Alex understood instantly. His redemption wasn't his own. It was a corporate branding tool. His quiet, painful progress was just currency. "I can't go back," Alex stated, the words firm. I promised myself and Sarah that I wouldn't let the shadow of my father control my life anymore. Going back is walking into his trap. He declined the offer, sending a clear message to the board. The CEO is dead. The father remains. 13. The long game of trust. The true measure of his change came not from the boardroom, but from Elias Sterling. 6 months after unsupervised visits began, Alex was picking up Aurora from Sarah's home when Elias answered the door. Sarah was late returning from a hospital meeting. "Sarah's running 15 minutes behind," Elias said, his presence filling the doorway with quiet authority. "Come in. Aurora just finished her bottle." The encounter was a landmine of potential tension. Alex was standing in the home Sarah shared with the man who was her rock, the man he knew was the better choice. "Thank you, Elias," Alex managed, walking into the living room. Aurora was in her playpen, kicking happily. Elias sat on the sofa, scrolling through his tablet. "Sarah asked me to give you the updated feed schedule. She changed her morning bottle slightly." As Elias handed him the schedule, Alex saw a moment of quiet opportunity. "I wanted to thank you, Elias, for stepping up for Sarah when I wasn't there, for being present for Aurora." Elias looked up, his expression unreadable. "I did what any decent man would do for someone he cares about. Sarah is extraordinary. She deserved better than what you gave her." "She did," Alex agreed immediately, swallowing the familiar bitterness. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deflect. "And I know that my actions cost me the right to ask for anything. But I want you to know that my commitment to Aurora is absolute. I will never do anything to disrupt the peace and stability you and Sarah have built for her." Elias studied him for a long moment, looking for the old arrogance, the old manipulation, finding only simple, stark sincerity. "I believe you, Alex," Elias finally said, a slight nod of respect. "If Sarah trusts you with our daughter, I will uphold that trust. But understand, you have to keep earning it, every single day." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a truce, a hard-won acknowledgement from the man who had the moral authority to judge him. What do you think was the most difficult instinct for Alex to overcome? The urge to run away when things got hard, or the temptation to reclaim his corporate power? 14. The fragility of love. The following Christmas, Alex spent a few hours at Sarah's house, a carefully planned, neutral co-parenting event. He was making cocoa, watching Aurora, now almost 18 months, stack blocks, when Sarah stepped out onto the porch to take a phone call. The call was brief, and when she returned, her face was ashen. "What's wrong, Sarah?" "That was my doctor," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I had a blood test last week. It's not confirmed, but I think I might be pregnant." The news hit Alex like a silent bomb. He knew immediately that it was Elias's child. The thought was painful, a sharp reminder of the life he was excluded from. But his first instinct was not jealousy. It was concern. "Are you okay? What do you need? I can call Elias now." "No!" Sarah cut him off sharply. "I don't know what I need, and I haven't told Elias yet. It's too much." She looked at Alex, her eyes wide and scared. "I can't go through that stress again, Alex. Not after everything with Aurora." In that moment, Alex saw not the strong, unyielding co-parent, but the frightened woman he had abandoned years ago. He realized that the greatest act of love wasn't grand gesture or sacrifice. It was simple, unwavering stability. He walked over to her, avoiding the impulse to touch her, respecting her boundary. "We'll handle this, Sarah. Whatever you decide, whatever happens, you have my word. You won't be alone. Aurora needs her mother well, and I will do whatever is necessary to ensure your peace and privacy. My commitment to your stability is absolute." He offered her not romance, but a partnership rooted in trust, born from the deepest failure. Final Q&A. If Sarah is truly pregnant, what is the most important role Alex can play to support her and Elias? without crossing the line. This journey of redemption is far from over. Share your predictions for Sarah and Alex in the comments. Hit like if you believe true change is possible, and subscribe for the next chapter.